What if your entire life was built on a lie? Imagine being a billionaire who has everything money can buy, but lives with a hole in his heart where his family should be. A chance encounter in a rainy alley is about to turn his world upside down. Or, picture yourself as a homeless teen who spent your life believing nobody wanted you, only to discover a strange birthmark on your hand might be the key to a past you never knew existed. 2 lives, 1 impossible connection, and someone willing to kill to keep 18 years of secrets buried forever. Rain pounded the streets of Seattle like tiny hammers, turning the evening sky into a dark blanket. Julian Thorne checked his watch and frowned. He was late for the charity gala, and being late was something Julian Thorne was never known for. "The traffic is terrible, sir," his driver said, tapping the steering wheel. "It might be another 20 minutes. Julian sighed. 20 minutes might as well be 20 hours in his world. "I'll walk from here," he decided, grabbing his umbrella. "It's just 3 blocks down." "But sir, the rain—" "I've survived worse than rain, Howard." Julian stepped out into the downpour, his expensive shoes immediately soaked. He'd built a tech empire worth billions, but even he couldn't control the weather. As he hurried along the crowded sidewalk, he remembered a shortcut through an alley that would save him 10 minutes. The alley was darker than the main street, lit only by a flickering light halfway down. Julian walked briskly, eager to reach the warm, dry ballroom where Seattle's elite waited. He was the main donor for tonight's homeless youth program, though if he was honest with himself, it was more about the tax benefits than the cause. That's when he saw the boy. Huddled against the brick wall, a skinny teenager sat with his knees pulled to his chest. He wore a dirty hoodie, jeans with holes that weren't put there by designers, and shoes held together with duct tape. A small paper cup sat beside him with a few coins inside. Julian almost walked past. He'd trained himself to look away from the city's homeless over the years. It was easier that way, but something made him slow down. Maybe it was the way the boy didn't beg or call out. Maybe it was how young he looked. No more than 17 or 18. Or maybe it was the simple, hand-drawn sign beside him that read, "Not drunk, not on drugs. Just had bad luck." Julian paused, fishing in his pocket for some bills. He'd drop them in the cup and continue on his way. The boy raised his head, and Julian froze. There was something in his face, something familiar in the shape of his eyes, the curve of his jaw. It struck Julian like a physical blow, making him catch his breath. The teenager had sandy brown hair plastered to his forehead by the rain and piercing blue eyes that seemed too old for his young face. Julian told himself he was imagining things. The boy looked nothing like her. Nothing like him. "Spare anything, mister?" the boy asked, his voice soft but not weak. Julian nodded, unable to speak for a moment. He reached into his wallet and pulled out several $20 bills, dropping them into the cup. "Thank you," the boy said, surprised at the amount. He reached out to make sure the rain wouldn't soak the money. That's when Julian saw it. On the back of the boy's right hand was a birthmark. Not just any birthmark, but a distinctive crescent shape, like a quarter moon. Julian's heart seemed to stop in his chest. The exact same mark his son had been born with 18 years ago. The son who had died in the hospital fire, along with Julian's wife, Eliza. Or at least, the son he'd been told had died. "What's your name?" Julian asked, his voice barely a whisper. The boy hesitated, eyes narrowing with suspicion. "Why do you want to know?" Before Julian could answer, his phone rang. His assistant's name flashed on the screen. "Mr. Thorne, where are you?" "Everyone's waiting. The mayor wants to present you with the award before dinner." Julian couldn't move. He stared at the birthmark, memories flooding back. Memories he'd locked away in the darkest corners of his mind. Eliza in the hospital bed, smiling despite her exhaustion. A tiny baby boy with that same crescent birthmark. The nurse, placing his son in his arms for the first and only time. The call 3 days later about the hospital fire while he was away on business. The 2 closed caskets at the funeral. "Mr. Thorne? Are you there?" The boy was staring at him now, uncomfortable with the strange man's attention. Julian began. But what could he say? "I think you might be my dead son?" The boy would think he was crazy. "Sir, the mayor is asking." "I'll be there in 5 minutes," Julian finally answered, then hung up. He looked at the boy one more time, trying to memorize every detail of his face. "I have to go," Julian said, his voice thick. "But I'll come back tomorrow. Will you be here?" The boy shrugged. "Maybe, maybe not." Julian nodded, understanding the non-commitment of street life. He pulled out a business card and placed it next to the cup, protected from the rain by the slight overhang. "If you need anything. Anything at all." The boy didn't take the card, just looked at it warily. Julian forced himself to turn away and continue down the alley. Each step felt like he was walking through concrete. Behind him sat a boy with his son's birthmark. His son's eyes. Maybe, just maybe, his son. But Mason Thorne had died in that fire. The authorities had confirmed it, hadn't they? By the time Julian reached the glittering charity gala, his mind was 1,000,000 miles away. He smiled for the cameras, accepted the humanitarian award, and gave his rehearsed speech. But inside, his world had been turned upside down by a chance encounter in a rainy alley. And the only thing he knew for certain was that tomorrow he'd go back to find that boy. Julian couldn't focus during the charity gala. He shook hands, smiled, for photos, and said all the right things. But his mind kept drifting back to the alley, to the boy with the crescent birthmark. "You seem distracted tonight, Julian," said Mayor Wilson, clapping him on the shoulder. "Everything all right?" "Just tired," Julian lied. "Been a long week." The truth was something he couldn't share with anyone. How could he explain that he might have just seen a ghost? That the son he had buried 18 years ago might be alive and homeless on the streets of Seattle? By the time his driver took him home to his penthouse apartment overlooking the city, Julian felt like he was in a dream. He dismissed his housekeeper and stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the rain make patterns on the glass. The city lights blurred through the raindrops, reminding him of another rainy night 18 years ago. The night his world fell. Apart, Julian had been in New York on business when he got the call. A fire had broken out in the hospital where Eliza and 3-day-old Mason were staying. By the time he landed in Seattle, all that remained were ashes and horrific news. The fire had started in the wing where the newborns were kept. Eliza had run into the flames trying to save their son. Neither survived. Or so he'd been told. Julian walked to his office and opened the safe hidden behind a painting. Inside was a small wooden box he hadn't opened in years. His hands trembled as he lifted the lid. There it was, the only photo he had of baby Mason, taken just hours after his birth. In the picture, Eliza held their son, her face glowing with joy despite her exhaustion. Julian's finger traced the tiny crescent birthmark visible on the baby's right hand. The same birthmark he had seen tonight. Julian grabbed his laptop and searched for information about birthmarks. Could 2 people have the exact same one, in the exact same place? The medical websites said it was extremely rare. Next, he searched news articles about the hospital fire. He'd avoided reading them for years. The pain was too great. Now he couldn't. Stop scrolling through report after report. Tragic fire claims lives of mother and infant son. Tech entrepreneur Julian Thorne loses family in hospital blaze. Fire department concludes faulty wiring caused deadly hospital fire. There was something odd about the reports, though. No mention of how they had identified the bodies. Julian had been too devastated to ask questions at the time. He had simply accepted what the hospital administrators and police told him. But what if they had been wrong? What if Mason hadn't died that night? Or worse, what if someone had lied? Julian didn't sleep that night. He paced his apartment, the photo of Mason clutched in his hand. Outside, the rain continued to fall, and memories he'd tried to bury for 18 years resurfaced like bodies floating to the top of a lake. Eliza laughing as they painted the nursery blue, the sound of Mason's first cry in the delivery room, the weight of his tiny body in Julian's arms, the emptiness of the house after the funeral. After Eliza and Mason died, Julian had thrown himself into his work. He built Thorne Technologies, from a promising startup into a global corporation worth billions. His facial recognition software was used by governments and companies worldwide. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd developed technology to find people, yet he'd failed to find what mattered most. As dawn broke over Seattle, Julian made a decision. He showered, dressed in plain clothes, jeans and a sweater instead of his usual suit, and headed back to the alley before his morning meetings. But the boy was gone. Julian stood in the spot where the teen had huddled the night before. The paper cup was still there, but the sign and the boy had vanished. So had Julian's business card. Had the boy taken it? Or had someone else picked it up? Julian's phone buzzed with messages from his assistant. Board meeting in an hour. Investors waiting. Contracts to sign. For the first time in 18 years, Julian Thorne didn't care about his company. He canceled all his meetings with a single text. Something's come up. Reschedule everything, his assistant replied immediately. Everything? That's 3 days. Of meetings, sir. Everything, Julian confirmed. He stood in the alley a moment longer, then made another call, to a number he hadn't dialed in years. Pike? Julian said, when a gruff voice answered. It's Julian Thorne. I need your help finding someone. Thomas Pike had been a detective before Julian hired him to investigate the hospital fire years ago. He'd found nothing suspicious then, but he was the only person Julian could trust with this. I think my son might be alive. There was a long pause before Pike answered. I'll be at your place in 30 minutes. Julian took one last look around the empty alley before walking back to his car. The rain had stopped, but the chill remained. Somewhere in this city was a boy with a crescent birthmark, a boy who might be Mason Thorne. And Julian would move heaven and earth to find him. Thomas Pike hadn't changed much in the years since Julian had last seen him, still built like a bulldog, with a face that looked like it had been carved from stone. His salt and pepper hair was now more salt than pepper, but his eyes were as sharp as ever. Tell me everything, Pike said as he settled into an armchair in Julian's living room. And I mean everything. Julian told him about the encounter in the alley, the birthmark, and his growing suspicion that the hospital fire might not have been what it seemed. Pike listened without interrupting, his face giving nothing away. When Julian finished, he nodded slowly. It's thin, he said finally. A birthmark isn't proof, but I've seen cases crack open on less. I need to find him, Julian said. I need to know for sure. I'll start with the homeless shelters and soup kitchens. Got a description? Julian closed his eyes, recalling every detail of the boy's face. 17 or 18. Sandy brown hair, blue eyes, thin but strong-looking, about 5'10". The birthmark is on his right hand, a perfect crescent shape. Name? He wouldn't tell me. Pike stood up. I'll need a recent photo of you and your wife and the baby picture with the birthmark. I'll run facial recognition. Julian almost laughed at the irony. I developed that technology to find him, and I never thought to use it until now. Sometimes we can't see what's right in front of us, Pike said, his voice softening slightly. Especially when it comes to the people we've lost. On the other side of the city, Ezra Miller jerked awake as rain leaked through the abandoned building's roof and dripped onto his face. He sat up on his thin sleeping mat, rubbing his eyes. "Morning, sunshine," said a cheerful voice nearby. Miko. Chung sat cross-legged on her own mat, already awake and sorting through her backpack. At 17, she was a year younger than Ezra, but had been on the streets just as long. With her dyed purple hair and collection of mismatched clothes, Miko looked like any other teenage rebel, except most teenage rebels still had homes to go back to. "What time is it?" Ezra asked, yawning. "Almost noon. You slept forever." Miko tossed him a slightly squashed granola bar. "Breakfast of champions." Ezra caught it and smiled his thanks. The abandoned office building they'd claimed as their current home wasn't much, but it was dry, mostly, and safer than the streets. 6 other homeless youth shared the space, but everyone kept to themselves. "You've got cash," Miko noticed, pointing to the bills sticking out of Ezra's pocket. Ezra nodded. "Some rich guy gave it to me yesterday. Weirdest thing. He stared at me like he'd seen a ghost." He pulled out the bills and counted. $100 in 20s. More money than he'd had in months. "We can eat real food today," he said. Miko grinned. "Pizza? And maybe new socks. Mine are basically cardboard at this point." As Ezra shoved the money back in his pocket, a small white card fell out. He picked it up. "Julian Thorne, CEO, Thorne Technologies," he read aloud. Miko's eyes widened. "Whoa, that's the face recognition guy. He's like mega rich. His face is on billboards downtown." Ezra frowned at the card. "Why would someone like that give money to someone like me?" "Maybe he's not as much of a jerk as most rich people," Miko suggested. "Or maybe he thinks you're cute." "Gross," Ezra said, but he couldn't help wondering. The man had looked at him with such intensity, especially when he noticed Ezra's birthmark. Almost like he recognized it. Ezra had always been self-conscious about the crescent-shaped mark on his hand. The other foster kids used to tease him about it, calling it his moon curse. One foster mother had even tried to cover it with makeup when visitors came, saying it made him look weird. He shoved the card into his backpack next to his only other valuable possession, a silver pendant with a strange symbol on it. The pendant was the only thing he had from before he entered foster care. According to his file, it had been around his neck when he was found wandering near a burning building at age 3. He had no memories of that night or of any parents. His earliest memories were of the first foster home. Not a happy place. "We should move spots today," Miko said, interrupting his thoughts. "I heard from Danny that cops are sweeping this area tomorrow." "Yeah, okay," Ezra agreed, but his mind was elsewhere. "Hey, have you ever heard of Thorne Technologies? Only that they make all those cameras and face-scanning stuff the cops use." Miko shot him a worried look. "Why? You're not thinking of calling that guy, are you?" Before Ezra could answer, another homeless teen, Vince, burst into the room. "Heads up," he said breathlessly. "There's some guy asking questions at St. Mary's Kitchen, showing pictures and stuff." "Cop?" asked Miko. "Doesn't look like it. Older guy, built tough. He's offering cash for info about some kid." A chill ran down Ezra's spine. "What kid?" "Didn't stick around to find out," Vince said. But he was real interested in kids with birthmarks. Miko looked at Ezra's hand, then back at his face. "Okay, that's weird and creepy. Why would someone be looking for a kid with a birthmark?" Ezra closed his fist, hiding the crescent mark. "I don't know, but I don't like it. Being noticed was dangerous when you lived on the streets. Being hunted was worse." "We need to move," Ezra decided, stuffing his few belongings into his backpack. "Now?" "Where to?" Miko asked, already packing up. Ezra thought for a moment. "The library first. I want to look up this Thorne guy." As they slipped out of the abandoned building and into the busy street, Ezra pulled his sleeve down over his birthmark. For 15 years, no one had cared who he was or where he came from. Now, suddenly, a billionaire was giving him money, and someone was asking questions about kids with birthmarks. It couldn't be a coincidence, and on the streets, coincidences could get you killed. Julian sat at the head of the conference table, surrounded by the top executives of Thorne Technologies. They were discussing the company's latest facial recognition software update, but Julian hadn't heard a word for the past 20 minutes. His mind was back in that alley with the boy. "Mr. Thorne?" his CFO, Vanessa Reeves, said, snapping him back to the present. "Your thoughts on the pricing model?" "I trust your judgment," Julian said, not having the faintest idea what they were talking about. "Go with whatever you think is best." The executives exchanged concerned glances. Julian Thorne never delegated important decisions without scrutinizing every detail. Something was off. "Sir," said Marcus Chen, his chief operating officer, "are you feeling all right? You've been distracted for days now." Julian looked around the table at the worried faces. These people had helped him build his empire, but none of them knew about the emptiness inside him. None of them knew that every success, every billion added to his fortune, felt hollow without Eliza to share it with. Without the son he never got to raise. "I'm fine," Julian lied. "Just thinking about a new project. Speaking of which, I'll be taking some personal time for the next few weeks." This announcement brought shocked silence to the room. In 18 years, Julian Thorne had never taken a vacation longer than a weekend. "Is everything okay?" Vanessa asked. "Perfectly fine," Julian said, standing up to signal the meeting was over. "Marcus will handle things while I'm unavailable." His team filed out. His phone buzzed with a text from Pike. "Need to meet. Found something." Julian's heart raced as he texted back. "My office. 1 hour." For the first time in years, Julian felt something he'd almost forgotten: hope. The Seattle Public Library was Ezra's favorite place on cold days. It was warm, dry, and best of all, no one bothered you if you were quiet and looked like you were reading something. "That's him," Miko whispered, pointing at a computer screen. Ezra stared at the Wikipedia page for Julian Thorne. The man from the alley looked back at him, older and more polished in the photo, but definitely the same person. According to the EEU article, Thorne was worth over $20 billion and had revolutionized security technology with his facial recognition software. It also says his wife and baby son died in a hospital fire 18 years ago, Miko said, scanning the text. "That's sad." Ezra felt a strange twist in his stomach. 18 years ago? That would make his son my age now. "Weird coincidence," Miko said. There was that word again. Coincidence. Ezra didn't believe in them. He pulled his sleeve back to look at his crescent birthmark. Then he scrolled through the images of Julian Thorne, searching for, he wasn't sure what. "I need to find out why he was interested in me," Ezra said. "Maybe he just felt sorry for you," Miko suggested. "Rich people sometimes get guilty about having money." "No, it was something else," Ezra insisted. "The way he looked at my birthmark." A librarian walked by, giving them a suspicious look. Ezra quickly closed the browser and stood up. "Let's go," he whispered to Miko. "I don't feel good." It wasn't a lie. Ezra had been fighting a cough for days, and now his head was pounding. Sleeping in the damp, abandoned building hadn't helped. Outside, the rain had started again. Ezra pulled his thin jacket tighter, but it did little to keep out the cold. They walked several blocks before he had to stop, doubling over in a coughing fit that left him gasping for air. "You sound terrible," Miko said, her face creased with worry. "We should go to the free clinic?" "No," Ezra shook his head. "I'll be fine." But he wasn't fine. By evening, Ezra was burning with fever, shivering on his sleeping mat in their new hideout, the basement of another abandoned building. "You need medicine," Miko insisted. "I'll go to the drugstore." "No stealing," Ezra said weakly. "Use the money." "But we were saving it for—" "Just go," Ezra whispered, closing his eyes. "Please." While Miko was gone, Ezra drifted in and out of consciousness. In his fever dreams, he heard a woman singing a lullaby he somehow knew but couldn't place. He saw flames and smoke, and felt strong arms carrying him away from danger. When he woke, a woman was bending over him, but it wasn't Miko. This woman was older, with kind eyes and a stethoscope around her neck. "He's awake," she called over her shoulder to Miko, who was hovering anxiously nearby. "Ezra, I'm Dr. Rivera from the free clinic. Your friend brought me here. You have pneumonia, and you need to come to the clinic for treatment." Ezra tried to sit up, but fell back, too weak to resist as they helped him to his feet. "My things," he mumbled. "I've got your backpack," Miko assured him. "Don't worry." As they helped him out to Dr. Rivera's car, Ezra's sleeve rode up, exposing his birthmark. "That's an interesting mark," Dr. Rivera said, her eyes lingering on the crescent shape. "I saw something about birthmarks like that in a medical journal once. They're quite rare." Ezra was too sick to care about his birthmark. All he knew was that he felt terrible, and for once, someone was helping him instead of hurting him. Maybe that was worth the risk of being noticed. Back in his office, Julian listened intently as Pike explained what he'd found. "I've been asking around at shelters and soup kitchens. There's a homeless kid who matches your description. Goes by the name Ezra Miller. Been in the system since he was 3. Julian's heart pounded. "And the birthmark?" Pike nodded. "Crescent shape on his right hand. Just like you described." "Where is he?" "Did you find him?" Julian asked, barely able to contain himself. "Not yet," Pike said grimly. "But we need to hurry. Word on the street is he's very sick. And he's running." "Running? From what?" "From you," Pike said simply. "Or at least from someone asking questions about him. These street kids don't trust anyone, especially not rich men who suddenly take an interest in them." Julian felt a cold knot of fear form in his stomach. His son, if this Ezra really was Mason, was out there somewhere, sick and afraid, and time was running out. The free clinic was crowded with patients when Dr. Rivera brought Ezra in. She led him past the waiting room to a small examination room. "In the back." "You should have come sooner," she scolded gently as she helped him onto the exam table. "Pneumonia isn't something to ignore." Ezra just nodded, too exhausted to argue. Miko hovered nearby, clutching his backpack like it contained gold. "Can I stay with him?" she asked anxiously. Dr. Rivera smiled. Of course. He'll need a friend. She examined Ezra thoroughly, frowning at what she heard through her stethoscope. After taking his temperature and drawing blood for tests, she prescribed strong antibiotics. You need rest in a warm, dry place, she said firmly. Is there somewhere you can stay? Besides that abandoned building? Ezra and Miko exchanged glances. We're fine where we are, Ezra said, his voice hoarse. Dr. Rivera sighed. I can't force you, but you should know that pneumonia can be deadly if not treated properly. I'd like to keep you here for observation, at least overnight. Before Ezra could protest, a coughing fit doubled him over. That decided it. He would stay at the clinic tonight. As Dr. Rivera prepared the antibiotics, her eyes fell again on Ezra's birthmark. There was something familiar about it, something she had read recently. That birthmark, she said casually. Have you had it since birth? Ezra nodded, pulling his sleeve down to cover it. Why does everyone keep asking about my stupid birthmark? Dr. Rivera's curiosity grew. Who else asked about it? Some rich guy in an alley, Ezra muttered. And now, someone's going around shelters asking about kids with birthmarks. A memory clicked into place for Dr. Rivera. Last month's medical journal had featured an article about genetic markers, including distinctive birthmarks that ran in families. One photo had shown a crescent-shaped mark identical to Ezra's, described as extremely rare and hereditary. And hadn't she just read something about Julian Thorne making another massive donation to the hospital's burn unit? The same Julian Thorne, whose wife and infant son had died in a hospital fire 18 years ago? I need to check something, she said, trying to keep her voice casual. Rest here. I'll be back with your medication. In her office, Dr. Rivera searched quickly through her medical journals until she found the article. There it was, a photo of the crescent birthmark. According to the article, this particular birthmark shape appeared in less than 0.01% of the population and was strongly hereditary. She then searched online for news about Julian Thorne and found recent articles about his donations to children's causes. One photo showed him at a charity event, and she noticed something she hadn't before. A small scar on his right hand, in almost the same place as Ezra's birthmark. Could it be possible? Could Ezra be Julian Thorne's son, who supposedly died in that fire? Dr. Rivera didn't consider herself impulsive, but something told her this was important. She found Julian Thorne's business contact information and sent a brief email. Mr. Thorne, I believe I may have information regarding a matter of personal importance to you. A young patient with a distinctive crescent-shaped birthmark on his right hand was brought to my clinic today. If this means anything to you, please contact me urgently. She added the clinic's address and her phone number, then hit send before she could second-guess herself. Julian and Pike were reviewing security camera footage from areas near the shelters when Julian's phone chimed with an email. He almost ignored it, but something made him check. The subject line read, "Patient with distinctive birthmark." Julian's hands shook as he read the message. Then he was on his feet, grabbing his coat. "I know where he is," he told Pike. "A free clinic in Belltown." "Wait," Pike cautioned. "If we both show up, we might scare him off again. Let me go first and make sure it's really him." Julian wanted to argue, but knew Pike was right. If this Ezra really was Mason, the last thing Julian wanted was to frighten him away when he was sick and vulnerable. "Fine," Julian conceded, "but call me the second you confirm it's him." Pike nodded and left. Julian paced his office, unable to sit still. After 18 years of emptiness, he might be hours away from finding his son. The thought was overwhelming. He picked up the photo of baby Mason, tracing the tiny crescent birthmark with his finger. The missing piece of his heart might soon be returned to him. Julian replied to Dr. Rivera's email with a simple message: "On my way. Please keep him there." When Miko returned from the vending machine with snacks, she found Ezra asleep on the exam table. His breathing was still raspy, but the medicine was starting to work. His fever had dropped slightly. Sitting in the chair beside him, Miko pulled out the silver pendant from his backpack. She'd always been curious about it. The symbol etched into it looked like some kind of company logo, a stylized T inside, a circle. On a whim, she took out her phone and did an image search for company logos with T. Hundreds of results appeared. She scrolled through them idly, not really expecting to find anything. Then she stopped. There it was, an exact match for the symbol on Ezra's pendant. According to the caption, it was the original logo for Thorne Technologies, designed 18 years ago by the founder's wife, Eliza Thorne, the same Thorne whose son would be Ezra's age if he hadn't died, the same Thorne who had given Ezra money in the alley, the same Thorne whose company used facial recognition software. Miko's heart raced as the pieces started falling into place. She gently shook Ezra awake. "Ezra," she whispered urgently, "I need to tell you something about your pendant." But before she could explain, the door opened. Instead of Dr. Rivera, a stocky, tough-looking older man stood there. "Ezra Miller?" he asked. Ezra sat up quickly, instantly alert, despite his illness. "Who's asking?" "Name's Pike. I just want to talk." Ezra didn't like the look of this guy. He seemed like a cop or worse. "Not interested," Ezra said flatly. "Please leave." Pike didn't move. "It's about Julian Thorne." Ezra tensed, and Miko instinctively moved between him and the stranger. "What? About him?" Miko demanded. "He wants to meet you," Pike said to Ezra. "It's important." "Why?" Ezra asked, suspicious. "What does a billionaire want with me?" Pike hesitated, then said, "He thinks you might be his son." The room went completely silent. Ezra stared at Pike in disbelief. "That's crazy," he finally said. "His son died in a fire." "That's what everyone thought," Pike replied. "But now he's not so sure." Ezra's mind was spinning. The rich man in the alley. The questions about his birthmark. The way the guy had looked at him like he'd seen a ghost. And now Miko was holding his pendant, looking at him with wide eyes. "Ezra," she whispered, "I think he might be right. This symbol on your pendant, it's the old Thorne Technologies logo." Ezra looked from the pendant to Pike, his thoughts jumbled with fever and confusion. Was it possible? Could he, a homeless, nobody who'd spent 15 years bouncing through the foster system, actually be the long-lost son of a billionaire? In his feverish state, the lullaby from his dreams echoed in his head. A woman's gentle voice singing words he somehow knew but couldn't remember learning. "I need to get out of here," Ezra muttered, trying to stand up. But his legs gave way, and Pike caught him before he hit the floor. "You're not going anywhere except back on that bed," Pike said firmly. "You're sick, kid." As Pike helped him back onto the exam table, Dr. Rivera rushed in, looking flustered. "Mr. Thorne is on his way," she announced. Ezra's panicked eyes met Miko's. Whatever was happening, it was happening too fast, and he wasn't ready. In his feverish state, he couldn't tell if this was a dream or a nightmare. But one thing was becoming clear. The bizarre coincidences piling up around him weren't coincidences at all. They were pieces of a puzzle he never knew existed. A puzzle about who he really was. The clinic door burst open. and Julian Thorne stood there, out of breath like he'd been running. His expensive coat was soaked from the rain, his normally perfect hair disheveled. His eyes immediately locked onto Ezra. For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound in the room was Ezra's labored breathing. "Mr. Thorne," Dr. Rivera began, "perhaps we should discuss this outside first." "No," Julian said, his voice barely above a whisper. He couldn't take his eyes off Ezra. "I've waited 18 years. I'm not waiting another minute." Ezra struggled to sit up, fighting against his weakness. Miko moved closer to him, protective as always. "What's going on?" Ezra demanded, his voice hoarse. "Why are you all looking at me like I'm some kind of ghost?" Julian stepped forward slowly, as if afraid Ezra might disappear if he moved too quickly. "Your birthmark," Julian said, gesturing to Ezra's hand. "I saw it in the alley. It's identical to the one my son had." Ezra instinctively covered his birthmark with his other hand. "So what? Lots of people have birthmarks." "Not like that one," Dr. Rivera interjected. "That particular shape is extremely rare, genetically linked." "And your age," Julian continued. "You'd be exactly the same age as my son." Ezra shook his head, feeling dizzy from more than just the fever. "Your son died in a hospital fire. I grew up in foster care. My parents died in a car crash." "Is that what they told you?" Pike asked quietly. "That's what's in my file," Ezra insisted. "I've seen it." Julian took another step closer. "May I?" he asked, reaching toward Ezra's pendant, which Miko still held. Miko looked at Ezra, who nodded reluctantly. She handed the pendant to Julian. Julian turned it over in his hands, his eyes filling with tears. "Eliza designed this logo. My wife. She wore a pendant exactly like this one." "That doesn't prove anything," Ezra said, but his voice wavered. The room seemed to be spinning around him. "Where did you get it?" Julian asked. "I've always had it," Ezra admitted. "Since before I can remember. The social workers said it was around my neck when they found me." "Found you where?" Pike pressed. Ezra hesitated. "According to my file, I was found wandering near a burning building when I was about 3. I don't remember it." The color drained from Julian's face. 3 years old," he whispered. "The fire was 18 years ago. You would have been 3. Ezra's head was pounding. This was too much. He was just a nobody. A throwaway kid that nobody wanted. He couldn't be the long-lost son of a billionaire. "This is crazy," he said, trying to stand up. "I need to get out of here." But as he tried to rise, his legs gave way again. This time, it was Julian who caught him. "You need a hospital," Julian said, his voice firm but gentle. "Let me help you." "Why?" Ezra challenged, even as he leaned against Julian's support. "Why? Do you care?" "Because you might be my son," Julian said simply. "And even if you're not, you're sick and need help." Ezra wanted to argue, but he was too exhausted. The fight was draining out of him, along with what little strength he had left. "Fine," he muttered. "But Miko comes too." Julian nodded. "Of course." Within minutes, Julian had arranged for an ambulance to take Ezra to the best hospital in Seattle. Pike stayed behind to talk with Dr. Rivera, while Julian rode in the ambulance with Ezra and Miko. In the emergency room, doctors quickly took over, hooking Ezra up to IVs and oxygen. Julian hovered nearby, unwilling to let the boy out of his sight. "They need to run some tests," a nurse explained, gently steering Julian toward the waiting area. "You can see him again soon." Julian nodded numbly, collapsing into a chair. Miko sat across from him, studying his face with open curiosity. "You really think he's your son?" she asked. "I do," Julian admitted, "but I understand why he's skeptical." "His whole life, nobody wanted him," Miko said bluntly. "Now, suddenly, a billionaire shows up claiming to be his dad? It's a lot." Julian winced at her words. The thought of his son growing up unwanted, believing, himself abandoned, was almost too painful to bear. "If he is my son," Julian said quietly, "I've missed 15 years of his life. 15 years I can never get back." "Then don't waste any more time," Miko advised with the straightforward wisdom of someone who had grown up too fast. 2 hours later, a doctor informed them that Ezra was stable, but would need to stay in the hospital for at least a few days. "Can we see him?" Julian asked immediately. The doctor nodded. "He's asking for you. Both of you," he added, looking at Miko. Ezra looked small and vulnerable in the hospital bed, his face pale against the white sheets. But his eyes were clearer now, the antibiotics and fluids already helping. "I agreed to something while you were talking to the doctors," Ezra said as soon as they entered. "What's that?" Julian asked. "A DNA test," Ezra replied. "They're taking samples from both of us." Julian tried to hide his relief. "That's good. It will give us answers." "Don't get your hopes up," Ezra warned. "Even if by some crazy chance I am your son, I'm not the kid you lost. I'm not some perfect rich boy who'll fit into your world." "I don't expect you to be," Julian said gently. "I just want a chance to know you." Ezra was silent for a long moment, then said, "The doctors told me you're paying for everything. The private room, the specialists." "Of course," Julian said. "Why?" Ezra asked again. "You don't know for sure that I'm your son." Julian met his gaze steadily. "Because helping you is the right thing to do. And because every instinct I have is telling me you're Mason." "My name is Ezra," he insisted. "Then that's what I'll call you," Julian conceded. An awkward silence fell between them, 18 years of separation creating a chasm that neither knew how to bridge. Finally, Ezra spoke again. "After the DNA test, when I'm better, then what happens?" It was the question Julian had been asking himself since the moment he saw the birthmark in the alley. "That's up to you," he said honestly. "But I'd like you to come stay with me. Just until you're fully recovered," he added quickly, seeing Ezra's wary expression. "No strings attached." Ezra glanced at Miko, who gave him a slight nod. "Okay," he agreed reluctantly. "But just until I'm better. And I'm not calling you Dad or anything." Julian smiled, his heart lighter than it had been in 18 years. "That's fair. One step at a time." As a nurse came in to check Ezra's vital signs, Dr. Rivera pulled Julian aside in the hallway, her expression serious. "There's something strange about Ezra's medical records," she said in a low voice. "Before age 3, they don't exist. It's as if his life started the night of that fire." Julian's smile faded. If Ezra truly was Mason, then someone had gone to great lengths to hide his identity. The question was, who and why? 3 days later, Ezra was discharged from the hospital. He stood awkwardly in the lobby with his backpack, containing everything he owned in the world, slung over his shoulder. Miko stood beside him, equally uncomfortable in the fancy hospital with its marble floors and expensive artwork. "Ready?" Julian asked, approaching them. Ezra nodded, though he wasn't ready at all. The DNA test results wouldn't be back for another few days, but he had agreed to stay at Julian's penthouse until then. The ride in Julian's sleek black car was silent. Ezra stared out the window as the city passed by, gradually changing from his familiar world of struggling neighborhoods to the gleaming towers of downtown where the rich lived. "This is it," Julian said, as they pulled up to the tallest building Ezra had ever seen. The penthouse took up the entire top floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered views of the entire city, from the Space Needle to Mount Rainier in the distance. Everything was spotless, modern, and expensive-looking. "It's like a museum," Miko whispered, afraid to touch anything. "It's your home for as long as you need it," Julian told them. "Both of you." He showed them to their rooms, actual bedrooms with real beds, private bathrooms, and closets bigger than any place Ezra had ever slept. "I'll let you get settled," Julian said. "The kitchen is stocked. Help yourselves to anything." Once Julian left, Ezra sat on the edge of the bed, running his hands over the soft comforter. "This is weird, right?" he asked Miko. "Like, really weird?" "Super weird," she agreed, bouncing slightly on her own bed. "But also kind of awesome? When was the last time you slept on a real mattress?" Ezra couldn't remember. For the past few years, it had been shelter cots, abandoned buildings, or the occasional couch when someone took pity on him. "I don't belong here," he said quietly. "Maybe you do," Miko replied. "Maybe this is where you were supposed to be all along." Over the next few days, Ezra kept to himself, exploring the penthouse when Julian was at work. He found himself drawn to Julian's home office, where photos of a beautiful woman with auburn hair sat on the desk. "That's Eliza," Julian said from the doorway, making Ezra jump. "My wife!" Ezra put the photo down quickly. "Sorry, I was just—" "It's okay," Julian assured him. "You have every right to be curious." Ezra stared at the photo. "She was pretty. She was beautiful," Julian agreed, his voice soft with memory. "And kind. And brilliant. She designed our company's first logo, the one on your pendant." Ezra touched the pendant around his neck. If I'm your son, why didn't anyone know? Why was I in foster care?" Julian sighed heavily. "That's what I've been trying to figure out. I've kept every newspaper article about the fire." He opened a drawer and pulled out a folder, spreading its contents on the desk. Headlines screamed about the tragic hospital fire, with photos of the burnt-out building and Julian's grief-stricken face at the funeral. "Everyone told me you and Eliza died in that fire," Julian explained. "There was an investigation. They said it was faulty wiring." "But it wasn't," Ezra guessed. "I don't know," Julian admitted. "Pike is looking into it again. If you are Mason, if you survived somehow, then someone must have taken you from that hospital." The thought sent a chill through Ezra. Who would steal a child and abandon him? To foster care? "I have dreams sometimes," Ezra said hesitantly, "about fire and smoke and a woman singing." Julian's eyes widened. "Singing what?" Ezra hummed a few notes of the lullaby from his dreams. Julian's face went pale. "That's the lullaby Eliza used to sing to you, to Mason, every night. It was a song her grandmother taught her. No one else would know it." The revelation hung in the air between them. It wasn't proof, but it was another piece of the puzzle clicking into place. Ezra's mind was spinning. All his life, he'd believed he was nobody, just another foster kid that the system forgot. But what if he was someone? What if he had a father who had been looking for him all along? Before he could process this, Julian's phone rang. The caller ID showed Pike's name. "Excuse me," Julian said, stepping out to take the call. Ezra stayed in the office, looking through the newspaper clippings. One showed Julian at the funeral, standing next to another man, tall and distinguished-looking with silver hair. When Julian returned, his face was grim. "That was Pike," he said. He found something odd in the original fire investigation. Certain evidence went missing, and the investigator who ruled it an accident retired suddenly right afterward, with a surprisingly large bank account. "You think someone covered it up?" Ezra asked. "I don't know," Julian replied, "but I intend to find out." As if on cue, Julian's phone rang again. This time the screen showed unknown caller. Julian answered and put it on speaker. "Stop digging into the past, Julian," a distorted voice warned. "Some things are better left buried." The call disconnected, leaving them staring at each other in shocked silence. Whatever secrets lay in the past, someone was still trying to protect them, and that someone knew exactly where to find them. The DNA results arrived the next morning by special courier. Julian's hands trembled as he opened the envelope. Ezra stood across the room, trying to look unconcerned, but unable to hide his anxiety. Julian read the results, then looked up, his eyes filled with tears. "It's a match," he said simply. "You are my son." The words hung in the air between them. After 18 years of separation, after all the loss and loneliness both had endured, the truth was finally confirmed. Ezra sat down hard on the couch, overwhelmed. He was Mason Thorne. He had a father. He belonged somewhere. "I always thought knowing who I was would feel different," Ezra said quietly. "Like everything would suddenly make sense." "Does it?" Julian asked. "No," Ezra admitted. "It just brings up more questions." Before they could discuss further, Julian's phone rang. It was Pike. "Someone broke into my office," Pike reported, his voice urgent. "They took all my files on the hospital fire. And Julian, they left a message. Final warning." Julian's face hardened. "Come to the penthouse. Now." While they waited for Pike, Julian activated the building's enhanced security system and called his head of security to station additional guards in the lobby. "Do you think we're in danger?" Miko asked, looking nervously at the windows. "I don't know," Julian admitted. "But I'm not taking any chances." When Pike arrived 20 minutes later, his face was bruised and a cut above his eye was hastily bandaged. "They were waiting for me," he explained grimly. "Professional hit. If I hadn't been expecting trouble, I'd be dead." Julian helped him to a chair. "Did you recognize them?" "No," Pike said. "But before they took the files, I scanned some key documents." He pulled out his phone, including this. The document was a statement from a night nurse who had been working the evening of the fire. She reported seeing a man carrying a baby out of the hospital shortly before the alarm was raised. The report had been marked not credible and buried. "There's more," Pike said. "I tracked down hospital financial records from that time. Someone made a large donation to the hospital foundation right after the investigation closed. The donor was a shell company that traces back to..." The security system suddenly blared, cutting him off. On the security panel, a red warning flashed. "Breach detected." "Someone's in the building," Julian said, checking the camera feeds. "The guards are down." Moments later, the elevator dinged. The security door should have prevented anyone from accessing the penthouse, but it slid open smoothly. A tall, elegantly dressed man with silver hair stepped out. Julian recognized him immediately. "Raymond," he said, his voice cold. "What are you doing here?" Raymond Wells, Julian's longtime business partner and friend, smiled sadly. "I think you know, Julian. I got a call that Pike was asking dangerous questions." With horror, Ezra recognized him as the man from the funeral photo, standing beside Julian. "It was you," Julian whispered, the terrible truth dawning on him. "You started the fire." Raymond nodded, pulling a gun from his pocket. I didn't want it to come to this. You were never supposed to find the boy." "Why?" Julian demanded, positioning himself in front of Ezra. "Why would you do this?" "Eliza discovered I was selling our technology to competitors," Raymond explained, calmly, as if discussing the weather. "She confronted me that night at the hospital. I couldn't let her tell you. So you tried to kill her," Julian said, his voice breaking. "And my son." "The fire was meant for both of them," Raymond admitted. "But when I got there, I couldn't kill a baby. So I took him instead. Left him at a church across town." "You let me believe my family was dead," Julian said, anger and grief mixing in his voice. "While you helped me build the company, pretending to be my friend." "I was your friend," Raymond insisted. "I helped you become a billionaire." "You stole my life!" Julian shouted. In the background, a silent Miko had been typing frantically on her phone. Suddenly, distant sirens could be heard. Raymond's face hardened. "Enough talking. I can't let this come out." He raised the gun, pointing it at Julian. "No!" Ezra shouted, lunging forward to push Julian aside. The gun went off. The bullet meant for Julian hit Ezra in the shoulder, spinning him around. As he fell, the security panel near the door exploded with a shower of sparks. Pike had managed to fire his own concealed weapon. Police officers burst into the penthouse moments later, weapons drawn. Raymond was quickly disarmed and handcuffed. Julian barely noticed. He was kneeling beside Ezra, pressing his hand against the wound to stop the bleeding. "Stay with me," he begged. "I can't lose you again." Ezra's eyes fluttered open. "I remembered," he whispered. "When the gun went off, I remembered the fire. And her." "Eliza?" Julian asked, his voice breaking. Ezra nodded weakly. "She was singing that song, the lullaby." As paramedics rushed in, Julian held his son's hand tightly, tears flowing freely down his face. After 18 years of separation, fate had brought them back together. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but they would face it together. Father and son finally home. That was the end of this story. The Mark of Fortune. Thank you so much for listening. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from today. If you enjoyed this emotional tale of a father and son reunited after 18 years, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more heartwarming stories like this one. Don't forget to share with your friends and family if you think they'd enjoy it too. Spreading these stories helps share kindness and raise awareness about families separated by circumstances beyond their control. Until next time,